Alright, good afternoon. So as I mentioned today in class, I'm now going to post your classical Rome video. So as you see here on the title slide, it's always key to remember that Rome goes through two phases. First they're a republic, then they're an empire, and reflecting upon the key concept questions. A lot of the questions are directed at how did imperial governments establish their rule and authority. And so here's the case of empire kind of going through two phases. So that would be, be careful not to interchange what they did during republic versus what they did during empire if you were to write an essay on this topic. All right, one second. Okay, cool. So the Roman Republic, around 800 BC, Rome began as a small kingdom influenced by the Etruscans in what is now present-day Tuscany. Around 509 BCE, Roman monarch was deposed by Roman aristocracy, and the Roman Republic was created. So that's key to know. A monarch is a single absolute ruler, and it was replaced by a rule of a group of individuals, and that's going to turn into representative government. So Rome, they do conquer the Greeks, and they do adopt quite a bit of Greek culture. Remember last week I mentioned that the Athenians were practiced democracy, but Rome is going to leave a very long legacy of government influence. So it's key to look at now that they've created a republic, and to remind you, a republic is when you have elected representatives. So Rome gained independence from the Etruscans and established itself as a republic, so it's a state without a monarch but with representative rule. So those representatives made up the Senate, and the Senate was patricians. And so these are key terms you really have to know for Roman social structure. So the patricians were the members of the aristocracy, so that means you basically had wealthy elites that were members of the Senate. Senators held all executive offices in Rome. So think like presidential powers, but they didn't have a president. Those powers were just held by the senators, and that's the main legislative or law-making body. Patricians were the aristocrats who passed their positions down to their sons. So it's interesting that they were called representatives, and they called it a republic. They were not elected as they would be, say, in present day in the United States. It was a hereditary position. And then there's plebeians, and plebeians is the vocab word for the commoners, and that was 90% of the population, and they were represented in a general assembly, but the general assembly did not have nearly as much power as the Senate. So essentially they were being ruled, the republic was being ruled by rich elite. So within the Senate, and this is going to cause some problems down the road, but because they didn't have a single president, and keep in mind with the executive branch, the idea is that you execute the laws or actually carry out the laws. And so within Rome, they had a consul, and that consul, two men were elected to the position. So essentially you had two men who were leaders of the Senate. They shared executive power. They also controlled the military. So a lot of times these consuls were very competitive generals, competitive for power. So it's going to often be an issue where the two consuls oftentimes scheme and compete against one another. If a problem arose, the Senate could appoint a dictator to hold emergency power for up to 6 months. So in a time of crisis, and they didn't want to have issues of maybe two consuls disagreeing with one another, you create a temporary dictatorship, so that way decisions can be made more effectively and quickly. And so sometimes dictatorships are seen during a time of crisis as being more efficient for that reason. Problem: the two consuls were often ambitious and conspired against one another, as I mentioned, and that's going to exactly what happens with Julius Caesar, and he will be elected consul, and he will eventually have the other consul assassinated and emerge as leader of the Senate. A few things that are very important to understand in this unit, and in fact my plan on Wednesday is for us to analyze together as a class our first primary document, and that's the 12 tables. And this is when the Romans codified or wrote down laws, and we have had examples of written law in this class. However, the 12 tables are really significant because they have gone on to continue to influence other civilizations and later societies. The Roman Republic begins a period of expansion in the Mediterranean, especially due to the Punic Wars, where they will also acquire vast new territories. So a little bit more on the 12 tables. This was significant Roman Republic contribution on later of the Roman Empire. So it's interesting, the 12 tables were actually written under the Republic. They will survive into empire, so we'll talk about that. And eventually, when we see it in this PowerPoint, when Rome splits into the West and East, the Byzantine Empire will also preserve the legal code of the 12 tables, and that will actually go on to influence, Western Europe, down the road when we get into the post-classical era. So the 12 tables are significant because they allowed Rome to expand its laws and system of justice throughout the entire empire. So this was a way that they created unity across the empire and maintained their authority. In actuality, it's going to be difficult to enforce them across the whole empire. And what that means is it is also difficult to enforce them equally. Different territories had different judges, and different judges had different interpretations of the 12 tables. So it was definitely a flawed system, but however, it set a very important precedent to have written codified law that could be enforced across the empire. Some key principles of the 12 tables: a defendant is innocent unless proven guilty by the court of law. That should sound familiar. Defendants have the right to confront their accusers in a court of law, and judges may set aside laws they feel are unjust. And that's that last bullet point where things get a little sketchy, and that's what I was referring to, is that judges did have the freedom to interpret the 12 tables as they wished. So it wasn't that the laws weren't as consistently applied across the empires. We may typically see, say, like the United States laws, constitutional law being implemented. So the Punic Wars are pretty significant. It was a series of 3 wars between the Roman Republic and the Carthaginian Empire of North Africa. And so it was basically, a competitive and imperial expansion and acquiring new territory. So the first Punic War was fought in Sicily in the northern coast of Africa. Rome won, and as part of winning, they forced the Carthaginians to pay tribute. So tributary payments has been a common theme in period 2. They go to war again, the Second Punic Wars, and this is when a very famous military commander, Hannibal, who was fighting for the Carthaginians, will invade Italy from the north via the Alps. So if you think about it, so Carthage is northern Africa, and you would have had the Mediterranean Sea. So instead of attacking from the sea, they went up and around through a land-based attack and came down through the Alps with elephants. But Rome fought back in Italy and in Carthage, and the Carthaginian Empire then is going to be reduced. They're going to lose a lot of their territory, and it's going to be reduced to a very small empire just now in northern Africa. However, Rome learns the value of a strong navy and begins to build one themselves. And by the Third Punic War, Rome now takes the offensive. They invade and take Carthage, thoroughly destroying the city. So the success in these wars makes Rome the controller of the entire Mediterranean region. So Roman Empire. The government before Julius Caesar was weak. It was too small to rule a territory as large as Rome. So the Republic was very efficient at first, but as the empire grew, it was becoming more difficult to manage. Julius Caesar is appointed as a consul of the Senate. He was already famous military leader, charismatic. He was a patrician by birth, so he was already a wealthy, aristocratic military leader. Power struggles between Roman generals emerged. A civil war will evolve between the 2 consuls, and Julius Caesar will come out victorious. Due to the civil war, he's going to declare a state of emergency, and he's going to enact that clause in the Roman Republic that he can be dictator. So he's actually going to declare himself dictator. March 15th, 484 BCE, the Roman Republic dissolves and Caesar is assassinated by senators. And so this marks the end of Republic because he declared himself a dictator, and he's going to be assassinated. And you may think, okay, let's go back to being a republic. Well, that's not going to be the case, because the senators are going to recognize that the Roman Empire became too large to be ruled in the manner in which it was being ruled, and so this is when it will evolve into an empire or an imperial government. So Roman Republic to Roman Empire. Octavian later renames himself Augustus Caesar. He's going to become the first Roman emperor. He was actually nephew of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar didn't have a son to follow in his footsteps. The emperor has primary executive power, and the power of the Senate is going to decrease. The Senate does not disappear, and that's key to understand. The 12 tables do not disappear. However, all effective and most power is going to now lie in the hands of the emperor. So that is going to be a major transition from when you had the Republic, all the power is in the hand of a group of wealthy elite, and now the majority of the power is within the emperor's hands. Conquered peoples were allowed a good amount of self-rule, providing they did not rebel against the emperor's will. And this is going to be one of the successful elements of the Roman Empire. They are going to conquer many people in vast territories, and by allowing people to, take care of local matters and their own customs, they're also going to automatically make all conquered people citizens. This is a way that they create unity and loyalty to the emperor's rule. So the 12 tables will be difficult to enforce, but in theory they were, implied throughout the empire, and they established a precedent for written law. Those in conquered regions were granted citizenship. So as I said, this was very strategic. If those that you conquered are now treated as citizens, they're less likely to rebel or feel like they're being mistreated. And this is going to begin the era of what's known as Pax Romana, so the Roman peace, and is going to end with the death of Marcus Aurelius. So Pax Romana. So this is the era of peace and prosperity, system of public works, and so you probably read about this a bit today. I hope my Roman group is doing some research on this, but the Romans are going to be famous for their canals, their aqueducts. I don't think I'm going to, just so you guys can look at it. There's a pretty good article I can post from Newsela talking about the Roman aqueduct system. They're also going to patrol silk trade routes, so that helps promote trade. If traders know, they're less likely to be robbed or attacked while trying to travel and conduct in their economic practices. They're more likely to trade. So that's going to help promote the economy. Latin was promoted as the common language to unify the empire. They are going to establish common coinage to help facilitate trade, so standardizing coinage. Stadiums are going to be built for entertainment for citizens, and this is where the famous phrase is bread and circuses. All people need to be happy and productive citizens. If their needs are met, so bread, they're fed, and they're entertained. And it's just slightly insulting. It's kind of implying that if people are happy and people are fed, they're easily led and manipulated, or it's easy to keep them quiet and tame and controlled. So people are kind of sheepish. Entertainment was often brutal, as they used gladiator fights to the death. Sometimes people are thrown in pits against exotic animals. So they definitely had an interesting idea of what was entertainment, and and pretty brutal as well. So highway danger decreased, and this is what I kind of mentioned a moment earlier. They used forces or military forces to maintain security on roads and trade routes to promote trades. Like I said, traders felt safer, they're more likely to engage in trade. It's during this time that Jesus is born in the Roman province of Judea, Jewish rabbi in Galilee. So it says 72 BCE question mark. Historians do look at historical data, and there's some question as to the precise moment of his birth. 30 to 33 CE, Jesus is crucified, and Christianity will spread quickly across the Roman Empire. So understand, it takes a while for Rome to convert as a Christian empire. They were originally polytheistic. They adopted the gods and goddesses of Greece. They just renamed them. And they adopted quite a few other cultural elements from the Greeks that we'll see later on. So here's a map showing the Roman Empire at its height. So you can see how massive it is. I mean, if you just look, this is, Europe, Britain. In fact, my grandparents took me to Europe when I was 16. It's the only time I've been there. It's awesome. But I remember, one of the sights to see in London was like old preserved Roman walls. So you have Rome there. That's where it's originated from. So this boot-like peninsula is what is now Italy. And they spread east. You have all the way into parts of what we now call the Middle East or Southwest Asia. They conquered North Africa. Carthage was right around here from the Punic Wars. So you see quite a massive empire. So Roman architecture, so as I said, they're pretty famous for a lot of what they built. They used Greek themes in architecture, but expanded upon those ideas. So this is what's known as cultural diffusion. So Roman architecture looks very Greek, but they did implement some of their more Roman style to it. They built larger and more elaborate buildings than the Greeks. They also had more resources to do so, with large domes and arches. Their aqueducts basically was to channel water over long distances. In order to maintain a large empire, you have to maintain your agricultural surplus and keep people fed. So the aqueducts were extremely important in their success in maintaining an empire for as long as they did. As I said, they built stadiums for their gladiator contests and entertainment. Public baths was a common public function for the Romans, as more of like kind of leisurely, engaging in social discussion and so forth. So Christianity, so you saw the previous slide, Jesus was born, through his lifetime, became a prophet, and Christianity is going to really start to spread after he's crucified. However, the spread of Christianity is actually going to at first be deemed a threat to the Roman Empire. And it comes down to some of the religious beliefs, and just remember I'm talking about this from a historical perspective, but when Jesus is preaching ideas through Christianity such as your final judgment is in heaven and by God, and if you accept God and Jesus, then everyone is treated as equal. Well, you're completely undermining political authority that is based on inequality. I mean, the patricians, the aristocrats, and the emperor was seen as better than everybody. And so, believe it or not, it was kind of anti-authoritarian for the standard. And John Green actually talks about this pretty well in one of his crash course episodes on this. And so, at first, Christianity is definitely not accepted by the Romans. And the Jewish community felt challenged by it as well, but it was actually more, they felt politically challenged, as opposed to, having really like an issue with the belief system. However, the Roman Empire is going to start to weaken, and it's going to have a series of, weak emperors. There's going to be too much competition, and in fact, Constantine, the emperor of Rome, is actually, Rome itself is weakening to the point where he wants to relocate the capital of the empire to what he's going to name Constantinople, and that's actually in present-day Turkey. It's now known as Istanbul, and so that's known as the Anatolia Peninsula. So to kind of get to what's happening here in this slide, so Constantine is battling, he's at war, and coming up on the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, he receives a vision. And he is told in his vision to mark the Chi-Rho on all shields. And the Chi-Rho is this Greek symbol here, and it's Greek for Christ. And so he has all of his soldiers put the symbol on their shields, even though at this point he's not Christian. He's still polytheistic, and he wins the battle. So as a result, he personally adopts Christianity, and as emperor he issues the Edict of Milan, and he made Christianity an officially recognized and tolerated religion in the Roman Empire. So he didn't actually convert the empire, but he basically declared that Christianity would no longer be attacked or persecuted in the Roman Empire. And this is also when he shifts the capital to Constantinople, and this will eventually lead to the eastern half of the empire. So despite this, and Christianity will spread, a lot of people will convert, and it does actually act as a unifier for a while in Rome, the Roman Empire. However, the reality is that there's just been too much political competition among elites, and the empire is actually going to go through a few divisions where it's going to be broken up into smaller territories, because they do recognize it just got too large. It got too large to manage, and that's going to be a common theme with all of our empires. The Mauryas, was too large to manage across such a vast geography of India. The Guptas had the same difficulty. The Han are going to have the same difficulty, and Rome is going to be no different. And so the empire will be divided multiple times by multiple leaders, and they thought by basically dividing it but having like a loose confederation would help stabilize. 235 is split into 3 parts, and 293 it'll be split into 4 parts, and then it goes back to being split into 2. And this, pretty much will lead us into our post-classical era where the Roman Empire is officially split in 2. The western half, that red territory, is known as the Roman Empire still, and then the purple eastern territory will be renamed the Byzantine Empire. Both will be Christian. The Catholic Church will continue to solidify itself in the West, and then you'll start to have Eastern Christian Orthodoxy practices take root in the East. And again, it came down to that's known as the Great Schism, and that schism really came down to like differences in interpretation of Christian beliefs. So, decline of the Roman Empire. Several different problems, and you guys read about this quite a bit today. Across the empire, they're going to start to raise taxes to help manage it because it is so large. There's going to be economic inflation, and inflation. So high taxes combined with inflation leads to a decline in trade. So their economy is going to start to slow down and fall apart. And having a slow economy, trying to manage a large empire, is a very bad formula. A decline in trade, a slowing economy also means decreased money flow. Decline of agriculture and poor harvest, so some it's going to come down to some weather issues and some famines, and that also leads to civil unrest and political rebellion and revolts. Then from the outside, so those were internal problems, then from the outside they started getting invaded from barbarians, the Goths, the Vandals, the Ostrogoths, the Huns. So you may have heard of Attila the Hun. He's probably one of the most famous Huns. There's going to be interference by military generals in the government. So when you have those really inept emperors in power, military generals will interfere. So that also leads to a lot of political instability. The question arises, who really is in charge? So this all led to difficulty of ruling such a large empire. Ineffective emperors were more concerned with pleasurable lives than ruling wisely. So that means they were not spending money wisely, keeping themselves entertained, as opposed to making sound government decisions to maintain the empire. And you'll also have epidemic disease, and we'll see this come up quite a bit this year, that sometimes disease is a factor in weakening political stability. So now we're going to kind of look at the Mediterranean as a whole. So it's kind of like Greek and Rome put together. And so what were some of the cultural advancements? And as I mentioned earlier, the Romans are really going to adopt a lot of the Greek advancements and continue where the Greeks pick up. So Pythagoras was a Greek mathematician. He's going to develop the Pythagorean theorem. So got your a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Ptolemy is going to propose the sun's motion around a stationary Earth. So that's known as, oh my goodness, I'm totally blanking here. I was going to say heliocentric, but that's wrong. That's the exact opposite. But basically, he's proposing that the Earth was the center of the universe and the sun, revolved around the Earth. Some of the intellectual or literary accomplishments of the Romans, you have Homer, who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. I think a lot of you guys read that freshman and sophomore year in high school. Hippocrates, if any of you have parents that are doctors, you may have heard of the Hippocratic Oath. And this is an oath that all medical practitioners take, that they're going to practice medicine ethically and how they're going to treat their patients, and that is traced back to Hippocrates. And theater, the Greeks are going to really promote tragedies and theater to explore the gods and human behavior. They're also going to use comedies to satirize public officials, and this will continue with the Romans as well. So religion in ancient Greece and Rome. So as I said, before Christianity, there were polytheistic religions. Gods represented natural phenomena, but they have human forms. And these polytheistic religions were supported by the Greek polis and also the Roman Republic and the early Roman Empire. The Greeks will establish the Olympics. The Olympics were actually created to honor the gods, and this was a time where the city-states, Athens and Sparta and all the other ones were able to compete against one another. The Romans build their system of religion off of the Greeks' pantheon, so they're going to adopt the Greek gods and just rename them. People believed at the time what they did for the gods directly impacted their daily lives, so this is where you see people offering tribute to the gods in hopefully in return for favorable treatment here on earth. Gods in polytheism, and I talk about this in class a bit, but a very common trend, again, with any polytheistic religion is oftentimes gods are very human-like. They're imperfect, human foibles, human passions, they don't always make the best decisions. So in a way, when you look at polytheism in early societies, it was like they were trying to understand human behavior, and their gods were kind of like mirroring human behavior. And that's going to be a huge difference between polytheism and monotheism. Monotheism, having a single deity or god, is often portrayed as all-knowing and just and not susceptible to human behaviors. Patron gods, ceremonies, festivals. So again, this goes to offering tribute to their gods. And but polytheism does not generate a long-lasting global religion, and Judaism will continue out of period 1. Hinduism continues out of period 1, and then period 2 we had Buddhism, and now with Christianity, those are some of our major world religions today that have been able to sustain long-lasting beliefs. So society in Greece and Rome, very patriarchal. I apologize for not posting the slide deck for Greece. I really thought I had, but please go back and look at that. I did put in a good video showing gender relations of the Greeks. But in Rome as well in Greece, husband and father were in control of women. Say a woman's married, her husband passes away, all the control, legal rights just pass down to her son, her eldest son, and she has to now answer to her oldest son. So definitely patriarchal societies. Women, at times were active in small, like artisan crafts businesses, like pottery. They could own farms and small amounts of property, but for the most part, both these societies were extremely patriarchal. And key terms is definitely part of our class this year, and you want to know the phrase paterfamilias. This is definitely for Rome, and that's the phrase or the word used to explain the basic family structure of Rome, and again, patriarchal society. So oftentimes Roman families were multi-generational, so you'd have children and grandparents and grandbabies all within a household. They oftentimes had domestic slaves, so caretakers, and the oldest living male had complete authority over his entire family. Women had fewer legal rights than men, and oftentimes women were expected to remain indoors. And in fact, it's going to be the Byzantine Empire, when they break off from the east, they even required women to wear veils, and that's actually going to later influence Islam, and Islam adopts the veiling of women from the Eastern Byzantine Empire. And as I mentioned in class today, slaves were about a third of the Roman population. And at this time, slavery was actually kind of considered a natural social construct in the Mediterranean. And slaves, this isn't slavery as you're probably used to the context. When we get into the African slave trade in period 4, that really was horrific. But oftentimes, being a slave is never a good thing. But a lot of times the slaves, sometimes people willingly sold themselves into slavery because they had debt issues, so it was a way for them to pay off their debt. Oftentimes these were domestic servants, women caring for the children of their rich aristocratic families. And sometimes it was hard labor as well, so it was kind of a different situation. You had what was known as corvée labor and working on the latifundia. I believe that was in one of the readings today, but those were basically like large plantation-style farms that the Romans used. So the economy in Greece and Rome, Greek and Roman economies were based on commercial agriculture, trade, and slavery. Commercial agriculture is established colonies for agricultural production, so a large peasantry class. So this is key, especially for the Romans. Again, if you have a large population, you need to keep them fed. So you need to have a lot of agricultural surplus for all of your urban city dwellers. So latifundia were used in Rome. These are great landed estates specializing in agriculture destined for export. So for profit, that was the idea. And so, profitable exports for the Mediterranean were grains, olive oils, and wines. And they relied on the corvée or slave labor for a lot of that production. Trade, being run in the Mediterranean, a lot of trade was conducted through sea networks, but you also had extensive land trade where they would trade with Central Asian nomads, and then those great goods were often taken even further to the Han Chinese. So there was a lot of indirect contact between the Han and the Roman Chinese through the Silk trade routes. So labor systems, slavery, again, worked as household servants in agriculture and silver mining. So slavery existed for the Greeks and the Romans. Because slave labor was so widely used in Greece and Rome, neither developed technological advancements as labor-saving devices. So as a result, Greece and Rome will fall behind China and India. So we'll see, and we're going to see throughout the year that, the Chinese especially were just so innovative, and they came up with so many inventions that really shaped the modern world. But yeah, when you have a lack of resources, that tends to inspire innovation, because you had to find a way to get around your lack of resources. Well, the Greeks and the Romans didn't have a lack of labor, so unfortunately that's going to, they're not going to be put in a position where they're forced to be innovative, and so that's why they're going to fall behind a bit, the Chinese and the Indians. Corvée labor, so that was used in the late Roman Empire. These were citizens that performed public works in lieu of paying taxes. So essentially it was like slave labor, but they were poor, or they're in debt, and they couldn't pay their taxes, so they offered their labor in exchange paying their taxes. And this is, Roman roads are extremely famous, extremely well built. This is part of the reason why they were able to trade so well, and military. If you have good roads, your military could travel far, and that also aided their conquests. They built many bridges, construction, engineering projects as well because of that corvée labor system. And just to quickly sum up now, as we basically cover our last civilization of period 2, earliest belief systems, just quick review. Remember, polytheism is all from your summer assignment, essentially. All of our early river valley civilizations were polytheistic. Judaism was founded during period 1. That's the first major monotheistic religion. And what we have we call, historians refer to them now as the Abrahamic religion. So started Judaism, you have Christianity, then you have Islam as the last one. Zoroastrianism is going to be another monotheistic religion to come out of period 1, and that was from the Persians, so you looked at that a bit last week. Belief systems as opposed to religion. So China had Confucianism and Taoism, so it's good to clarify that those are a philosophy more so than a religion, but it did guide their way of life and how they viewed their purpose in life. So it's seen as a belief system, but it didn't really emphasize any kind of deity or God. India, Hinduism emerged out of period 1 with the Vedic texts from the Aryans, and then Buddhism, it was created in period 2, and still a major world religion today. And then lastly, last major religion for this unit is Christianity, and that came out of the Roman Empire. It emerged as a new religion in the early years, monotheistic, founded by Jesus of Nazareth, a Jewish prophet and teacher that Christians regard as the Son of God. Part of the reason why it's so popular is a lot of Rome was slaves, or they were poor. A third of the population was slaves. So again, a religion that promises that if you accept God or Jesus into your life, you're going to be, equal and loved under the eyes of God. This is very appealing to a society where not everyone, sorry, but a third of the population is slaves. So this is what's known as a universalizing religion, and this phrase is in the key concept, so please know it. Our two first and major universalizing religions, what that means is they promise equality no matter what is going on your earthly life, and that is going to be Buddhism, and that's going to be Christianity. And then our third universalizing religion we're not going to see until the next unit with the birth of Islam. It was spread by his disciples. Paul, one of the first, earliest, most notable missionaries, responsible for its rapid growth. And as you saw in an earlier slide, Constantine will make it a officially recognized religion, and then it's going to be later that it becomes the official religion of Rome. And I'm pretty sure that is our conclusion for today. So I hope that helped out if you had any misunderstandings. So thank you.